Hello there, fellow Tarnished, or just general lore enthusiasts. I know some people not quite in the Souls community still also watch these, because honestly it is pretty good lore content. But today, I am to bless you with my familiarities to another sort of lore topic I think gets overshadowed in some areas, but also gets blasted way out of proportion in others. And that is the topic of the Gloamite Queen. To the topic of the Gloamite Queen, there are certain mentions I should kind of bring forth. There is this sort of commonality that people like to just look at Melina when it comes to the Frenzied Flame ending and ultimately just kind of call her the Gloamite Queen for whatever reason. I want to dismiss that because it's kind of the most dirtied way of ever saying that ever, and it has absolutely no validity just outright to it. Like, did she have a Gloam eye thing going on? Yes. Didn't Blythe also? Yes. Didn't Malekith also? You see where I'm going with this. So, kind of get that out of your head, because, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. For now, let's get to the real sustenance of what I think is the more real and enticing topics of the Gloamite Queen. You know, I didn't even think about this part, and it just proves my point even harder. But let's kind of get started, actually. So the first thing I was actually kind of talking about was death overall as a subject. Now, you do see these black flames behind me. That is usually more so a thing to do with the loss of the destined death inside the blades, but it is still a very powerful, heavier flame, I should say. Did I say blade or did I say flame? But I definitely mean flame. And ultimately, it was a thing in sports used by the Godskin Apostles. But another thing to note is that it's not the only flame that loses its hue to it. There is another kind of flame that takes some kind of a leap on this topic. The ghost flame, as sported by the Deathbirds. This is a flame also in relation to death. It is also a flame. But more interestingly, it is related to a specific crafting material. This crafting material is the grave violet, a purple flower that blooms in graveyards, material used for crafting items, the hue of ghost flame. It's believed to be useful in calling for spirits. It's literally suggesting it is the exact same hue, the exact same color as Ghost Flame, which means Ghost Flame lost its color, which means it lost some kind of red element into it, which perhaps made it more of the same kind of, I would assume, purpley color. And as specified by the Grave Violets, it would be a more violet color. But that is not the only thing that stands out to me on this topic. One of the most unusual traits to Ghost Flame is that it is a very frost-inducing flame. The thing of death, but it induces frost. And it's also like an unusual sort of like paler and yet also kind of like darker flame on careful inspection. like you see these black elements within it. This sort of almost like a darkened and also almost kind of bluer elements to it. And it kind of made me remember something. A certain someone, as it were. Ranni the Witch. Her sorcery is described to us as heretical. Her practices in sorcery, I should say, they're described as heretical. We're not told why it's considered heretical. We are told, however, that it also induces frost. It was kind of a matter taught to her by a certain snowy old crone. We don't actually know anything about this snowy old crone, but we do know Ranni the Witch has a dark moon, for whatever that really means in a world that seems otherwise absent of dark. We're left with much to the imagination as to what that could really mean, but we are told that she beheld something that was cold, dark, and veiled in occult mystery, which is absolutely interesting, actually. But on top of that, we also notice that she herself has this rather pale attire, as well as a very bluer hued body that was said to resemble strongly what her mentor looked like. And not only that, we see she has this very brilliant, bright blue eye. In which case, let's actually take a quick look at her set. Now, on the underside, we see this interesting design. There's not much we can really make of that. However, it does look like a series of almost many flowers, even, on the underside of it. Otherwise, it doesn't seem to have any discernible patterns to it, really, that goes one way to the other. As if, like, it's not really on any sort of trail. It could also be described as almost snowflakes. And then on top, for whatever reason, if it is based on anyone, it also has this sort of a crown design into it. And similar to Truth in how Blythe's set has this fur coat on it, we also see this present. The fur coat in Blythe's set was used to help keep him warm, because he was also entrusted with this occult cold, and he needed to stay warm from it. So that's like an interesting little thing for you to know about. So we see this is a common sort of presence here. But let's talk about another kind of thing. Just a sec. Here in Nokron are the people, the Nox. Or at least a branch of them. Separated from this other distant more location of them. They were forced underground away from the rest of the civilization in a more banned sort of mannerism from the Golden Order due to a sort of being caught in high treason. This high treason was creating a relic sort of finger slayer blade. Now, we have no quite certainty as to whom was the relic, but we do know it certainly seen some use long before we gave it to Ranni for her own duties and purposes, which is proof enough it existed and it certainly was used. And I have some slight speculations as to whom it could have been. Before we really focus on that, let's first talk about I guess what's like the real subject of this video. Let's talk about the Gloamite Queen herself and her Godskin Apostles. The Godskins were her children. She had many. In fact, not only did she have many, but after they were born, they would be wrapped within the Godskin swaddling cloth itself, suggesting she had a certain, procedural care of them. She would cradle them and everything. Soon they will grow to become the death of the gods. And true enough to their relations to her, they would even bear this sort of very violet tone in their jewelry as symbolic representation to belonging to her, as well as the gold in their attire suggesting their relations to royalty and the Golden Order. There's all kinds of reasons to tie further into this, but of course you're expecting me to talk a bit more about the Black Flame. The Black Flame itself was once a flame of death, in the bringing of death, and all the Godskins had this flame. This flame once bared destined death within it, a more red flame in it, and would be later taken by force by Malekith, sealing destined death away. Or at least it was straight up taken. As for how well it was sealed and in what ways is a little bit left to the imagination. However, we did kind of see him with the physical sealing elements on his hand that in his boss fight he would just pierce with a dagger the Cincada, or Cincadia, and it would become his greatsword, the Black Blade. As for when, however, that's an interesting question. When was destined death taken away from our Gloamite Queen? How far back does it go? And was that perhaps even when death itself was sealed away from the Elden Ring? Now you see where the real substance of this topic gets. The question I'm really asking is, was Ranni already alive at this point? Was this well before the Elden Ring was shattered yet? That these two should know each other. Or even taken certain inspirations. We see lots of interesting facts, like Ranni's name was allegedly, according to Rajier, of course, in his little side quest, was sort of like embedded in the Black Knife fingerprint, I think it was called. In which case, not only did she have some kind of ties with these black knives that are somehow linked back to Queen Marika, but she also has some kind of ritualistic values with it all that could suggest she is in ways familiar with how death works. But it doesn't quite make sense that she should know. In fact, why would she? She was born of Karian royalty and not of the Erd tree initially. Well, I thoroughly do believe her mentor was the Gloamite Queen. In fact, if you pay attention to the doll's body, there is also a ring on it already. Before we accept her consort, of course, which was perplexing to me. And it adds on to the question to me. Of course, the obvious answer for why was she Gloamite? She had Gloam eyes. And why was she a queen? She wasn't simply a princess. She was married. Who her consort was is the real mystery. And that adds another question to the layer. Could her consort have become the Fingerslayer blade in the form of relic practices? And I think that much is out of the question for us to quite answer. In which case, if you restore destined death to that body Ranni has the red hues, her eye would become the right kind of gloam. Her body would reach a better sort of saturation to it that isn't simply blue. And it would coincide well with the wraith callers that drop the gray violets and are somehow also related to royalty according to the royal revenant's name, as both are of the same kind of junction of each other and equally weakened as cursed beings to Erd tree healing magic. And yes, that is physically a function. I've tested it. But not only that, the Wraith Callers have a certain item. An item to allow them to summon wraiths, which coincides well to back to Ranni. You know, when I stop being blind with my inventory. Maybe I never got it on this character. Imagine having a 400-hour character and never grabbing an item, but grabbing it on 5 others. But I did check this part on the wiki. It doesn't scale off of anything. Not even intelligence like Ghost Flame does. Which does suggest some interesting things about it, despite it summoning like wraiths as like vengeful spirits. But it does add another overall layer to the topic of what Ranni's goals were and against the Golden Order and why she sides with her mother. Especially if you realize the Wraith Callers and Revenants are up in the Moonlight Altar of all locations. More specifically, they are found about here, like all over here. There's 2 wraiths There's probably 6 to a dozen wraith callers. Their presence isn't explained, but we do know this is a lunar estate ruins, suggesting people that should be there should be of relations to the followers and worshippers of the moon. Why they would be there is otherwise completely baffling, especially if, like, we find them otherwise at other interesting locations, such as the Shaded Castle, like All About. And we also find them within Landell in the sewers. These are particularly interesting locations to find most things in, but it suggests they were a category of folk practically shunned into sewers. And not only shunned, but still welcomed into the Halig tree as accursed beings, no longer, or no, not at all, like, blessed with the affiliation to grace, but still welcome into the Halig tree's loving, caring arms. For Micula's ideals of an order after his metamorphosis. They would coincide well with his inclusionary topics and ideas to sort of improve and fix for the better. If he had any, like, formalities of their background knowledge as a whole towards his goals. But let's talk about the question some of you are dying to know about. Why Melina? Why did Melina have that eye, then? Why did Melina have Torrent? Well, you already heard my mention of Micula, and some of you are recalling the DLC announcement picture and seeing Micula writing seemingly Torrent. Now you're getting some puzzling, increasingly puzzling questions, and having a sense of how close we are to the answers to that question, truly. Now, the fact that she has only one Gloam eye is an interesting one to me. But at the same time, Ranni herself had only one eye in her doll's body, which could reflect the suggestion that perhaps Melina was given it for whatever reason. We know Melina is not the Gloamite Queen because, one, she is completely not in understanding the natures of what a mother is. She repeatedly questions about it in front of us in viewing of Bach. She questions what a mother does and what it means to have one. She tells us she was literally born at the foot of the Erd tree, and yet she will respectfully call America as mother. This could suggest that she couldn't have been the Gloamite Queen at all. In fact, she was probably at most a princess. And if you view her hair coloration with other known entities considered actual finger maidens, you realize it matches and coincides well with their hair coloration as well. So despite not having golden hair, despite not having white hair or red hair like all the other known direct offspring of America and whatever consort she had, she could have been a genuine finger maiden. For whom is quite the question. But more than likely, they successfully did burn her, but abandoned the path to actual Elden lordhood. What else it really means is up for debate, honestly. Now, some of you remember my previous video. I was doing some goofy comparison stuff and suggesting it as a viable means of as a tool that they use certain inspiration from previous games to help shape some of the storytelling into Elden Ring and also make it a backward storytelling compatibility. I do believe that much is true, but I don't believe it's fully true because they did have to make it more interestingly elaborate and more imaginative, reimagined if you would, more fresh. And overall, some people do assume there is just a singular linear storytelling to these, but the truth is it's probably about 50-50. Some parts there is, some parts there is absolutely not. It's more of like a he says, she says, and it gives off more of like the real events through the eyes of these people being incredibly more realistic and a cause worth fighting for and help drive you as the tarnished protagonist. In which case, that is, whichever you follow along is the true one. Is there any notable comparisons to this, actually? I want to say no. However, it does add a certain, like I said, it does add a certain layer of depth to the story. The idea that the Gloamite Queen could be a mentor of Ranni means that her story wasn't just in her mother's footsteps. It's a revenge story. Her mentor was turned on and destined death was taken from her. Ranni took an eye for an eye. And it hit the hardest by taking America's firstborn. The moon versus the sun. In certain gaps you wouldn't have thought too highly about. One of those interesting gaps being, why did Ranni have access and actual semi-command of the Black Knife Assassins? Well, they could have been related to the Gloamite Queen, really. But, there's also a bit of like a topic of the Nox themselves in relations to all this. Especially when it comes to the relic body. It very well could have been the consorts of the Gloamite Queen, and not only been a finger-slaying blade at work, but was already being used. And not only was it being used, it's probably what killed those other two fingers we've seen about. The ones at each of the towers. Only if that much was true and the shards were given to each of them, the shard bearers, it would suggest that it would have been done before that, but more than likely it would have been done in ways after that. But that would also suggest the Nox came below ground after the shattering. And that could have been part of the real defining times and traits of Ranni to the Golden Order, with them cursing each other and the Nox no longer relevant to the surface, and becoming a sort of protected class even by Radahn, who has personal history heritage with them to some degree with his family. And even if they did commit some kind of acts, it would be unlike him to simply, as this more heroic figure, to fully damn every single cause, and people especially, even if he has chosen his side. There's honestly quite a lot of elaborate storytelling we can draw out of Elden Ring, and even if it isn't directly stated to us, I do think there's quite a lot more we can get out of the environments, out of the people, and more especially out of the attires. I know I especially want to get a better look at some of this one, but the singular flap is in my way. But certainly that last... Oh, it's finally happened. But hopefully I'd like to see a little more of what other people come up with on this subject. If they think I'm wrong, if they think they got something else to throw at this topic, or if they think they've come across signs of another entity I could not find. Personally, I don't want to think it could be Mikula as any sort of consort in any of this matter, although I'm sure he had some delegations a little of all over. But I am absolutely thrilled to look into this a little better, get even these other better looks at all this. What I didn't personally expect to find when I started this was to realize EG was using the Black Flame, despite us having no reason for why he should be using a Black Flame specifically. And cut content would suggest he's committing suicide. But why a Black Flame still? There's no Godskins anywhere. However, there is a Godskin defending Ranni's tower. I don't think I need to express that much further. The amount of evidence is quite baffling, quite compelling, and adds quite a lot more conversations I would like to hear and see later on. But until next time, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention sooner in the video is the reminder that we do see a Godskin and his Black Flame monk down beneath the Kaled Divine Tower, in a design that suggests its intended part in pathing of the navigation of within the tower, suggesting that while we think that these towers were built specifically for these great runes, the timeline in which the Gloamite Queen might have passed could be suggested as quite a while as to when they actually did pass away. Like, maybe just prior to the Great Rune shattering, maybe during it, close to it. Like, I don't know what else you can really make of this. Like, these designs don't really suggest to me too much, in general. It's just like the general designs I've been already seeing across the Divine Tower, which doesn't tell too much, honestly, but something I have noticed further in is that the designs that show up on some of the doors, or like the mock doors, are here also, where it shows this sort of like beast here, as well as elements of other animals and what else. Like if you look into it, you can see kind of like scales and something kind of like flowy. You see this sort of like a skeleton-ish animal here in the center. And overall, there's not even anything in the game that actually tells us when these towers were built or relevant. We just know we have to kind of like pay visit to them to kind of revitalize our great runes that we acquire. Yeah, we haven't really seen anything that tells us too much. Like, that almost looks like something related to, like, the giants, but I kind of doubt it also. Almost looks like a flower design or something. This almost looks like it's supposed to mean something like a door or gateway. It has like a goofy line down, straight down the middle, and it's otherwise pretty much identical one side to the other in a mirrored fashion. Someone might be able to say something further into this, but that's not going to be me. So I'd rather not spitball too much into the design myself, but the overall fact that we do see a placement of the treasured weapon of the Gloamite Queen being here is an interesting topic on its own. Something we don't actually know, though, is where the defeat of the Gloamite Queen took place. And that also takes me back to another question I remembered asking people a different kind of time, and that was, when did Ranni, where did Ranni first steal destined death? And now you realize there's quite some interesting holes in the topic that aren't even at all like on the table to be explained and expressed to their fullest, because there would have been a time and a place. And I actually completely forgot to even mention this one sooner, but I had like a series of speculations on this topic, and one was that maybe that was part of what happened to Melina. Maybe Malekith had destined death with him in like Farum Azula, and that's how they got there and took it from him. But at the same time, it's just like, when would he have, or why would he have? It's like, certainly there would have been better places for him, right? There's certainly a lot of holes in the overall topic, and what bugs me is that nobody expresses them. Nobody talks about them. Sort of like, wherever did Godwyn actually get assaulted? I think in my previous video I might have mentioned, I think he got assaulted like there in Landell or something. But I do think Ranni could have used like the sleep in that to make way into the process. Otherwise, kidnapping a demigod who slew dragons and stopped another one, befriending them. It's like, how would you just simply subdue such a figure for any sort of ritual, unless if you had some kind of special methods? So yeah, there is definitely quite a lot further into this topic that doesn't quite make sense at this time being, or at least not for me. And I really would love to see what other people come up with on this subject. I haven't yet really seen people do too much spitballing on it. But overall, I do think it's worth investigating and would help elaborate further as to why there's this goofy looking spot seemingly currently not gone to anywhere beneath this tower, almost like it was going to. And if anything, it's facing straight towards Celia, or even as it were towards the Mogwin dynasty, which, if you hadn't made the connection, those are right by each other, and that's why we see Nox there towards a series of bridges that are knocked out that would otherwise lead towards Nokron. So you see there's a series of interesting connections that could also be other sorts of connections, and why I am particularly adamant on the further discussions, because the amounts of proof of the relativity is staggeringly high and like ultra Chad strong. Like, you could knock out Hercules with a punch in it and he wouldn't know how to fight back. It's like you just took his power away. Just like in the movie or something. So you see why I want to really investigate this. Uh-huh. Well... Now, I did actually just kind of stop to think about this. And overall, I don't know if it actually really matters, despite alleged possible mistranslations. Like, does that actually take away anything I've currently said about the concept? Like, we see there's still, like, topics of relevance of purple tied to death, and likewise still to gray violet and, you know, those who bring death. In which case, even if the gray violet itself is of loss of some relevance, it's not completely irrelevant by this mistranslation. This was something I did kind of like stop to think about. Like, I do actually kind of like stop and like talk about these like topics with people before I actually make this video. Although that particular translation topic actually came up, what, an hour or two before I was actually about to release the video. Like, I was going to still do like a thumbnail on that. But I had like the whole entire video uploaded. Ugh. But it's not a complete waste. Like, a lot of those topics still do matter. Like I said, a lot of this really is more so for the conversation, and it also still answers quite a lot of curious topics that otherwise get ignored, overshadowed, and just dismissed for absolutely zero reason. But besides that, it did make me realize that there could be another line of thinking to this topic, that maybe the consort, as it were, might not only have been in some relation to, like, the Gloamite Queen, or that Ranni's mentor could, if it wasn't the Gloamite Queen, it could have been a consort, as it were. So you see there's quite a lot of, it's not so easily disproven by even just, oh, this is a mistranslation. Like, even if it was a mistranslation, it doesn't directly disprove anything I had to say. It just suggests, oh hey, this wasn't what that really meant. But at the same time, I look at it with another kind of light that relates to the developers themselves here when it comes to From Software. And this makes more sense if you've paid attention to what was like some of the interviews they've had going, especially when it came to releasing Armored Core. One of the struggles I can personally tell you, especially when it came to older Armored Core, was it didn't get as much publicity, specifically because it was more Japanese than Western in design by nature, and that had a lot more backlash back then for its age than it would have today. In which case, today's markets is quite a very different light, I would say. But not only that, FromSoft has earned itself a better standing with the Western audiences. The same audiences it would try to kind of like captivate towards its games and area of the market and stuff like that. That's really a lot of what FromSoft has been doing as of late, so I wouldn't put it past them to also run some filter through what the story and games are about off that as a topic, especially when it comes to how they kind of started off into Elden Ring. Now keep in mind, they did base a lot of the world building around topics with George R.R. Martin, who is an English speaker. But something else I wouldn't put it past them is that they probably retranslated a few things and maybe even changed details from one language barrier to the next and brought further like conversation across these topics. Moving my mouse. So you can see why I'm not so keen to be dismissive just because, oh, mistranslation. That's very dismissive talk, and really it's still worth the conversation. Like, even if it was wrong, it would otherwise mean, hey, Ranni would otherwise more than likely have some kind of connections to the Helfin or someone of that nature, in which case maybe like the twin bird in some way. But at the same time, it doesn't quite make much sense because we get literally no reference of the twin bird through Karian nature, of history, of royalty, or anything like that. So there's clearly like it's not quite two sides of the same coin necessarily. It's almost like there's two coins and you can't tell which one's which without a very good inspection, but you're not allowed to get that good of a look at the inspection, if that makes any sense. Which probably won't actually happen until, say, DLC time, or unless FromSoft decides to implement something in between times. I wouldn't put it past them to do that neither when it comes to Elden Ring. After all, they did literally release the Colosseum. They did also change quite a few item descriptions over time. But, yeah, that is an interesting topic, though. That's, hue could otherwise mean flower, actually. But at the same time, I wondered if, now, someone who was translating this stuff did kind of point out that, some of the translating process is more so, pretty same in meaning overall, but with a different, flavor of text specific to who's reading it and who has to voice it, especially. In which case, I think it's still perfectly viable to consider how it's currently translated. But yeah, I could see how it could probably be further misinterpretive. I just think it's probably still up for debate. Overall, I think there should be more conversations like this. And I'd love to see like what other things other people found that I've probably not even noticed. But this is exactly why I want to spark these kinds of conversations. But yeah. Sorry for the re-interruption and making this video silly longer, but yeah, thank you for sticking around to this point. I wonder if anyone raced to this argument about the you know, the mistranslation before getting this far. But if you did, first. But you all have yourselves a great day. Blessed solstice, and yeah, take care.